wishing you all a happy Diwali. We thought no better way than to understand the lessons that we can get from the Bhagavad Gita, but more as a guide on how we can conquer life with Brahmachari Prasanna Sarupa. Sipping Thoughts, as you all know, is a multi-platform media company that was co-founded by me and by Nitya Bukutia. We set it up keeping in mind the tagline Real Women, Real Thoughts. We wanted to create a no judgment platform and create a network of women for women, and especially and also the men that have supported us. Sipping Thoughts now reaches out to about 2.5 million people on a monthly basis. We are available on Facebook, we are on YouTube, we are on Instagram, and we are, of course, on our website. Please do check us out. You'll find some amazing content there. I'm sure it'll keep you busy this Diwali. About our session today, the Bhagavad Gita. Though, as Prasanna says, it's set in a battlefield, it's a comprehensive handbook for a happier life. It is presented as a beautiful dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. The Gita helps us discover our true nature and thus gain access to the limitless potential that is within all of us. The wisdom in the Bhagavad Gita helps us excel in our actions, meet the challenges in our lives with poise, and attain peace in this chaotic external world. And boy, do we need it now. This session is an overview of what the Bhagavad Gita is and how we can make it a reference manual for life. A little bit about Brahmachari Prasanna. He began his career, like many of us do, in the IT industry, and he served for 14 years in various capacities. But then he wanted to explore and discover what lies beyond the usual avenues of employment. He exited the IT industry and spent 12 years in the ashram in Kerala as a disciple of Swami Bhumananda Tirtha. This path of self discovery enabled him to discover and realize the intricacies of the mind and its applications to real life situations. He now lives in Delhi and has dedicated himself to sharing his experience with others. He is of the firm conviction that spirituality bestows success, peace, and happiness for everyone and in all spheres of life. He is an alumnus of the prestigious IIT Delhi and IIT Madras. So he comes with also a lot of wisdom from there. And he is also the co-author of a book titled Good Values, Great Business, which was published by Sage Publications. So he kind of has that business mindset, the IT mindset, and the spiritual mindset. Welcome, Brahmachari Prasanna, to Sipping Thoughts. We're so excited to have you with us today.
So much. Thank you so much, Kirti. Thank you, Sipping Thoughts. And I'm extremely happy to have had this opportunity to talk to all of you about Bhagavad Gita. And it was interesting to note that this is a Diwali special, so it makes it more interesting. Great. I mean, like many things in life which come unexpectedly, this kind of an interruption, or rather, even before we started, we had a kind of a snag. I think
A
this
panic attack.
that's what life is all about. I think what is important is that we don't panic, we be patient, and that's what Bhagavad Gita is all about. Okay. On that note, what I intend to do in the next maybe 25 odd minutes is to give you an overview. Okay. Time is too short. Normally, the entire Bhagavad Gita would be probably a whole year of classes, okay, spread over 360 odd days, and we are trying to do that in about 30 minutes. Okay, so you can imagine how precise or how much we are going to make it a short, say, overview. The intent is to give you a good feel of what Bhagavad Gita is, uh, make you feel what it is all about, develop some conviction about, yes, this is probably something I would like to explore, and let's see some of the key lessons of Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so that's the intent. With that, let's move ahead. I think if time permits, we would definitely take some questions at the end of all this. Okay, uh, going forward. Okay, now let's look at what life is all about. Okay. Uh, we can, apart from the biological part of what life is, we are not getting into that. Let's see how we lead our lives and what is living. So in that sense, we experience a world of variety around us. We are constantly facing situations like the one we just had, which is a very, very minor example. Okay, we have so many other challenges in life. We are constantly engaged in work, some kind of work or the other, from morning till night and throughout our lifetime. Okay, we are engaged in work all the time. We all have various desires and aspirations which guide our life, which also drive whatever we do. So life is full of those things as well. And then constantly we are interacting with other human beings, our family, friends, people at work, and so on and so forth. So we are full of these relationships and interactions. And the world, as we know, is full of things and people towards which again we have our own take. Okay, this is what life is all about. It's a combination of all these things which we call life. And how do we see that? Whenever things go in our favor, okay? So for example, we may have a situation which comes up. It may be favorable or unfavorable. We may do something at work, we may succeed in it or we may fail in it. Okay? We have desires which may get fulfilled, may not get fulfilled. But that's for everything in life, there is a positive side to it and there is a negative side. A positive side as in favorable and the negative side as in unfavorable. So whenever things are in our favor, we call it, we refer to it as happiness. We feel we are happy when things go our way. We feel kind of sorrowful or grief or misery or suffering when we feel things are not going our way. Okay, so that's the broad definition of happiness. And Bhagavad Gita exposes to how, that's not a very accurate definition of what happiness is all about. But let's move forward and see how to look at life in the context of all these challenges. So if we take a closer look, do we believe that everything will go in our favor all the time? For example, we may have health issues at this point in time. The whole world is going through a health crisis. The coronavirus has taken over the whole world, so to say. What are we
We lose Prasanna?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So we may have health issues, financial situations which are challenging. We may take up projects which may not go very well in our favor. These things which are outside us, okay, it is very difficult to always say that they will go in our favor. Okay, so it's a mix of things which go in our favor, sometimes not so much in our favor. So, is it possible that everything in life will go in our favor? Absolutely not. Okay, but does that mean we can never be happy in that sense? Absolutely not. Okay, so what Bhagavad Gita exposes us to is the idea that how do we deal with life with all its trials and tribulations and still find what we call happiness. Okay, so Bhagavad Gita exposes us to a way of life where in this world of variety we are able to see a beautiful world. In the world of challenges and situations, how do we develop an undisturbed or a poised mind? In the world of activities, how do we always be joyful at work, whatever we do, and how do we excel at work? In our desires and aspirations, how do we stay content in everything? In our interactions, how do we stay poised, joyful, and spread that joy all around us? And with things and people all around us, how do we stay at peace all the time? Okay, this is the perspective Bhagavad Gita gives us. So it's not in one word happy or unhappy, but it looks at every aspect of what life is and gives us a way of how to live in this chaotic world, how to live in peace in this chaotic world. Because as human beings, all of us, without exception, are seeking what each of us may define in our own way called happiness. We want to be happy all the time. So, is it possible? The question is, we all will have, is it possible to be happy all the time? Bhagavad Gita says yes. So, it gives us an integrated view of life. It's not defined in terms of if I get something which I want, I will be happy. If If I don't get it what I want, I will be unhappy. This is a very binary, very simplistic, oversimplified view of life we have. But Bhagavad Gita takes us beyond this and tells us how we can have an integrated and more comprehensive view of life, which is not compartmentalized. We don't have to lead a life where I say this is my material way of life, this is my secular way of life, this is my religious or spiritual way of life. But Bhagavad Gita exposes us to an integrated view of this whole life where we can find peace and calm in whatever circumstances we are in. Okay. Now, let's come to Bhagavad Gita more specifically. We all, I think, would be familiar with this.
Chandan, if you want to share your slides?
I thought it is.
No, it is not right now.
I wonder how that happened.
We're fine without them also, because it was going quite fine.
Okay, so let's not have another interruption on our way. Let me go without that. You can all see me, I guess, then.
Yes, we can.
Okay. So the battlefield of Kurukshetra is where the whole dialogue happened. Okay. So the two armies have come to the middle, and Arjuna with his side is there, and he is driven by his able charioteer, who is none other than Krishna. And he tells Krishna, take me to the middle of the battlefield where I can see the armies. So Krishna does so. He takes the chariot right in front of Bhishma and Drona, his dear grandfather and his dear teacher. Now, suddenly, in that context, in that situation, Arjuna is overcome by extensive grief because he is facing his near and dear ones, and he has to fight these people in battle. Okay, so he is overcome by intense grief, and he just crumbles there and sits down in his chariot, and his bow falls off his hand. Okay, so that's the situation, that's the grief Arjuna goes through, okay, which forms the backdrop of the entire Bhagavad Gita. Okay, now having gone there to fight, Krishna finds Arjuna has completely given up every hope of fighting the war. But Krishna's job there is to make him fight. Okay? And Arjuna gives various excuses for why he doesn't want to fight this war. But as we know how the whole thing transpired later on. So this battlefield of Kurukshetra, where the two armies met, is very symbolic for us. The battlefield is nothing but one which symbolizes life, our life with all its challenges, with all its trials and tribulations. Okay, we can also see this as the battlefield which is our mind. Okay, the whole battle is going on where not in a battlefield, but it is in our mind. So this battlefield idea is nothing but one which symbolizes the mind and its whatever it goes through, and that's what we are exposing through Bhagavad Gita. Okay, so in other words, Krishna is discussing peace in the middle of a battlefield. Okay, so interesting contrast, isn't it? So just imagine we are discussing the very idea of peace in life right in the middle of a battlefield. So just imagine that picture and let's move on. Now, what happens following that? Now, Krishna is obviously there to guide Arjuna. Now, let's look at who Arjuna was. How did he come to this battlefield? Krishna was there to guide him, of course, but Arjuna himself was a great warrior, a very skilled archer. He has had great accomplishments in his life, winning various wars. And for this war, he has been preparing intensely. And he has had a great team with him, the Pandava team, and also other kings of various other kingdoms who came to join hands on their side to fight this war. So the entire Pandava army, which is strengthened by various kings is there to support Arjuna. But in spite of all that, Arjuna is still struck by grief. Okay. Now, what does this portray? This extreme grief, even though Arjuna was the greatest of warriors, it signifies that happiness is not something we find based on external achievements. It is not in the world outside. Okay, so even though Arjuna had everything going in his favor, but he still, when the moment came, he just sat down in grief, grief stricken. In fact, the very first chapter of Bhagavad Gita is titled Arjuna Vishada Yoga. Vishada means grief. So the focus of the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita is the grief of Arjuna. Okay? So unless we identify with Arjuna and his grief, we will never be able to appreciate the entire dialogue. Okay? So it's important for us to get a connect with Arjuna so that we are able to become part of this whole dialogue. In fact, I will go further and say, once we understand the context in which Arjuna is, the situation in which Arjuna is, we will find Arjuna exits the dialogue and we take his place. And this becomes a conversation between I or yourself and Krishna. So it becomes a conversation between us and Krishna. Okay, that's the beauty of the whole first chapter, which describes the dilemma of Arjuna and how he comes to this grief. Now, when we bring the attention to our own life, we find that we have all the comforts we have in life. Okay? We may have wealth, we may have some other riches, and we are successful in life. We have a good job, we have had other achievements, but we find ourselves still unhappy. Okay? So the question is, why is it that we are still unhappy? Okay. Now, here I wish we could have a dialogue here on this subject and we could spend a fair amount of time just discussing this one point. The question is, when such a situation hits us, what is the status of our mind? What do we do? Do we get down to introspecting over the situation? Do we ever ask ourselves, how do we go forward and be happy? So, the message of Bhagavad Gita here in such a context is, it says, our human endeavor begins in the direction of attaining our goal of happiness when we begin to inquire about the truth. When we begin to inquire about who we are, what is our identity, what is our nature, when we try to understand the human mind, the human intelligence, and how do we take it forward. So this Bhagavad Gita is one which exposes to us the path of inquiry. The whole spiritual path actually is referred to one of self-inquiry. There are two ways of describing the word self. I will not get into the details of it, but in very simple terms, it helps us inquire our real nature. Okay? And that is what this whole dialogue is all about, to understand our real nature. In fact, most of the scriptures in our land are based as a dialogue, so that there is a seeker of happiness and there is somebody who helps the seeker reach that happiness. So it's always presented as a dialogue because it is a path of inquiry. Okay? Now, what is the attitude Arjuna had in taking this situation into the next stage? Now, there are some very key lessons we learn from Arjuna. The first lesson is one of acceptance. Arjuna accepted the condition, accepted the situation. He recognized, the second is, he recognized the helplessness he had. Okay, so we have recognition. He identified his current position. Okay, he knows where he is. Take an example here. If you go to a, let's say the trade fair in Pragati Maidan, for example, and you look at a map. When you look at any map, the first thing you identify is, where am I? So there is one red dot you will find which says, you are here. Now, only when we know where we are, do we know how to get to whichever place we want to go to. Okay, so to understand our current position is very critical. Arjuna understood or identified his current situation. The other thing is he had the courage to express his weakness. He did not keep quiet. He expresses his weakness. He had the courage to do that. He had the humility to accept the fact that he doesn't know what to do. He had that humility in him. Then he had the yearning to change. He wanted to bring about a change in his life, in his mindset, in his thinking at that point in time. And most importantly, he did not delay the process. He at once told Krishna, please help me, please guide me. Okay. Now, this is very significant. He didn't say, after this war, Krishna, let us take a break, let's go there and discuss this. He didn't say that. He went into a discussion right then. There was no delay. Okay. So Arjuna shows us the way as to how we as a seeker of this happiness should be. Okay, so that is the key lesson from Arjuna's character and his conduct in the middle of the battlefield. So, based on this, what is Bhagavad Gita? It is nothing but a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. It is the essence of what the Upanishads are talking to us all about. Okay? It brings out the essence of the Upanishadic wisdom in these 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita. Okay? You can look at this as a manual, as a comprehensive guide to life. It's not just a philosophical discussion. It's a very explicitly practical, pragmatic way to lead our life. That's what is very special about Bhagavad Gita. Otherwise, just imagine a book which is some claim to be 5,000 plus years old would not have lasted in this world if it were not useful. Okay? It's a very practical way of leading a life which makes it effective, successful, joyous, and so on and so forth. Okay? So it's not something which is to be just discussed as a philosophical treatise, but it is a very fundamentally practical guide to daily life and living. Okay? So I can't stress enough this particular point of how practical this whole message is all about. Okay? Now let's look at 2-3 of the key messages which Bhagavad Gita talks about. The 3 popular phrases we are likely to hear. One is what is called Karma Yoga. Okay? It's a very popular phrase. All of us use it. In some cases, it is used slightly loosely as well. But what is this Karma Yoga? Now, before that, why Karma Yoga? Now, the word karma means action. Very simple meaning. Okay? Now, why is this important? Our life is full of action. From the time we are born till the time we die, we are constantly in action. Okay? And in a day, right from the time we get up from bed till the time we go to bed again, we are again constantly in action. Okay? So we have incessant action in our life. Okay? So obviously, the thinkers of our land started wondering, how do we convert this process of work or action which we are engaged in to help us achieve what we want in life? Okay? Not merely just achieve the object of the action, but to achieve the goal of life, which is happiness. Okay? Let's remember that every action is initiated by us, and there is an action which follows, and there is an outcome. The problem is, whenever there is an outcome, obviously every action has an outcome, we start thinking about the outcome more and less we focus our attention on the act itself. I'll give you an example. Let's say we start a project, whatever kind of project it may be. And assume that you are a project manager or you are part of a team which is engaged in this project. Now, the moment we begin this project, we start thinking about the outcome. We start wondering, if I get this project through very well, I will get this benefit, I'll get this promotion, I'll get this raise, I may get this opportunity work another country, and so on. We are constantly thinking about the outcome. Okay, the more and more we get occupied in the outcome, in the thought of the outcome, we get attached to the outcome. Okay, and any activity, whether it is a simple act of planting a small sapling or doing a large project, everything, the process is the same. Okay, but the more we think of the outcome and not the action itself, we get attached to the outcome, and in the event the outcome doesn't come so much in our favor, we are driven to misery. We suffer that consequence. Okay. Now, what Bhagavad Gita talks about is not to focus our attention on the outcome, but to focus and bring all our energy and thought process into the task at hand. Okay, so Krishna says, think of what you have to do and don't get attached to the outcome. Okay, because every action will take its natural course. So if I throw a ball up, it has natural laws based on which it will go up and come down. Okay, so we don't have to think about that. Okay, so Krishna suggests that we convert every action, every work into that of selfless service. He says, do that as a gift to somebody else, as a service to somebody else. Okay, so this is the path of Karma Yoga. Obviously, I'm trying to make it very brief because of the time we have. Otherwise, we could spend days discussing just the subject of Karma Yoga. So, in short, Karma Yoga is all about focusing our attention on the action and not on the outcome. With the result, Krishna says, work with joy instead of working for joy. Okay? When we are working for joy, we are looking at the outcome. When we work with joy, we are working with complete consciousness, mindfulness on the task at hand. Okay? So it is also true today in every context at workplace. Only a very calm mind can be exceedingly creative and excellent. Okay? So it's important to develop and cultivate a calm mind so that we can be successful at work. So it's extremely crucial that we examine this path of Karma Yoga in a little more detail. Let's move on to the other core idea of Bhakti Yoga. What is Bhakti? We normally see it as devotion to a deity. We imagine going to a temple, offering our worship, thinking of the deity, offering whatever materials we have as an offering to the deity. This is our typical idea of Bhakti. Now, in the Bhagavad Gita, particularly in the 12th chapter, Krishna brings in a new dimension to what Bhakti is. He says, he brings in various parameters. I'm just going to talk about a few of them, which are very, very central to the idea of Bhakti as described by Krishna. He says, never hate any being. When he says being in Bhagavad Gita, it refers to all creatures, plant kingdom, the animals, the human beings, and so on. Never hate anybody. Be friendly towards all. He says, be forgiving. Be not agitated by this world. Krishna says, have the same attitude towards friend and foe. Be compassionate towards the distressed. So, in other words, he is talking of an all-embracing attitude. An all-embracing attitude where we see divinity in everything. We see divinity in every being. We see divinity everywhere. So, this message of devotion is actually conveying a more deeper message, which is it brings about this message of oneness of the whole creation. It brings about the message of oneness of entire humanity to begin with. Okay? So that is the beautiful message of Bhakti he talks about. In fact, our scriptures have dealt with this subject in many, many ways. There is Srimad Bhagavatam where there is a reference to a discussion where the Lord says, I think it is in the words of Maharishi, where he says that the Lord accepts worship when the human being sees the same Lord or the same creation in every entity on this planet, okay, without any distinction between one person and another, when we see the same oneness in all beings, that is true worship. Okay? So this is the beauty of bhakti as discussed in Bhagavad Gita. In other words, bhakti here is camouflaged or described as oneness of creation, oneness of the universe. Okay, this in brief is what Bhakti Yoga is. The other popular phrase which you might have heard of is Jnana Yoga, which is the path of knowledge. Okay. Again, here this is a very comprehensive and complex subject, but let me just give you a hint of what it is all about. Now, whenever you think of the Bhagavad Gita, if you imagine a picture which picturizes the Bhagavad Gita, you think of a chariot. Okay, so if you go down to Google and say Bhagavad Gita or Krishna Arjuna dialogue, you will see hundreds of pictures of a chariot. Okay, a chariot where there is Krishna driving the chariot, and Arjuna sitting behind it. Okay, now this is a typical image. And this, in a way, symbolizes, the whole of spirituality. It symbolizes Bhagavad Gita as well. Now, let's look at what are the symbolisms used in this picture. Now, according to the Upanishads as well, and Bhagavad Gita also does the same, it describes the road on which the chariot is to be the world of objects. Okay, the world we are living in is the road on which this chariot is moving. Then it says the horses are the sense organs we have, our eyes, our sense of smell, and so on. The body is the chariot. Okay, and the charioteer is the intelligence, and the reins are the mind. So unless the intelligence is strong enough and holds the reins to control the sense organs, the chariot is likely to run helter-skelter. Okay? And the self, the I, which we refer to as, is nothing but the master of this chariot. Okay? In this case, Arjuna is depicted as what we refer to in our case as I, the self, the soul. Okay? Now, this is the symbolism which is pictured here. In other words, the summary says that what we refer to as I is the self and not this body. Now, this is the core message of Bhagavad Gita, and this is what is the core of what is referred to as Jnana Yoga, okay, or the path of knowledge. Now, because of paucity of time, I will not go further into it.
Can you just repeat that? Is it Gyan or Dhyan?
It is Jnana. In Sanskrit, it will be referred to as Jnana. In Hindi, it will be Jnana. It will be G-Y-A. Okay? It's Jnana Yoga. Okay? Now, the core point here is that the master of this chariot is who you really are. What is the one we refer to as I, we use the personal pronoun I, is what this master of the chariot is. So Gita talks about gaining mastery over this entire world. And how is this mastery achieved over this world? It is by achieving mastery over oneself. So when we have complete control over the mind, we have complete control over this world. That's why this title of this talk is also referred to as How to Conquer Life. When we conquer the mind, we have the life conquered. Okay? So take this as a key point of Bhagavad Gita, that who you are, your true identity is depicted by what is referred to as I or the self, and not this body or not this mind, not this intelligence. Okay? But what we refer to as I is what the true identity is. Okay? Now this, in a sense, is the core message of the Bhagavad Gita. Okay? The same idea is also described by Krishna in a brief way in the second chapter itself, where he says we or the human is nothing but the ocean and not the wave, Krishna says. Okay? Now, the way the rivers flow into the ocean in its depths is still in poise, in calm. The same way Krishna says we can be with that same poise when we take this message of Bhagavad Gita and take it forward. Okay? So we have the capacity, the potential to be like this ocean, where we allow all these inputs from across this world all the time, life situations, challenges, etc., and still be poised within. That is the message of an ocean, which is conveyed by Bhagavad Gita. The idea of acceptance of whatever the world throws at us. Okay? So to live in this world in this manner is the key message of in the interactional life of Bhagavad Gita, which Bhagavad Gita talks about. So how do we live such a life where we are able to deal with every situation that comes at us is why Bhagavad Gita is so special. Okay? So be like the ocean, Krishna says, in our depths with complete calmness. Okay? So, to summarize and conclude, I wish we could discuss this for some more time, but to conclude, the core point is make Bhagavad Gita a companion for life, a guide or a handbook for daily living. Only when we look at this text in a comprehensive manner and make this our guide for life will we benefit from this. Okay, it's not meant for a theoretical study. It's interesting to discuss the various chapters as a mere philosophical engagement, but the power of it lies in making its message a part of our life and live that message. Okay. Sukriti, if you have a few minutes.
I have one question, of course. This is the one that maybe hit me the most when you spoke. Now, have the same attitude towards friend and foe. I think most of us would find that very, very difficult to do. Any way that, how do we reconcile to that? And then we would love to take the question from Murali next time, also asking him to unmute.
So how do we look at, see, somewhere the whole, which is why Krishna also talks about the attitude of forgiving. One, it will be difficult to answer this question with a, 5 steps to making friend and foe the same.
That's what we like, the internet list 5 ways.
So there is nothing like, instant coffee as far as spirituality is concerned. We need to dwell into the idea of what makes us what we are. Understand who we are, because we constantly deal with in terms of whatever our fears are, apprehensions are, threats are. Now, when we get rid of those threats, we are no longer affected by the external world. When we come to the state of fearlessness, it doesn't matter where we stand, what we do. Constantly threatened by different objects or different people or different situations. The moment we make ourselves fearless, understand the potential that lies in us, then we stand, completely powerful and ready to conquer anything.
Thank you for that. Murali, we will take your question. Go ahead.
Pranams, this is Murali.
Sorry. Go ahead, Murali.
Yes. The question is, what is karma, akarma, and vikarma? This technical term, I'm not sure about that. Please explain. And the next question is, how we overcome the struggles in the devotional life?
Okay. See, let me take the first question in. There are many concepts in Bhagavad Gita. Okay. What is important in the message of the Bhagavad Gita is it's a very universal message. In the sense, what I'm trying to say is the same message of Bhagavad Gita has been interpreted by one branch of or one set of people who call themselves Advaitins, who follow the path of Advaita. Now they have also adopted Bhagavad Gita and lived life according to that. Similarly, the Dvaitins, the people who believe in duality, have also adopted the same message and are living their life as per the precepts of Bhagavad Gita. Similarly, there are various other factions. So you can come from any perspective and live life as per Bhagavad Gita. So what is special there? There are multiple concepts described in the Bhagavad Gita. Various words are used. Now, when you go into the depths of the words, okay, now it is important to interpret these words for oneself. Now, when we try to find a bookish reference, so if I Google meaning of karma or vikarma, it's easy, we will find an answer. That's why I'm hesitating to give a single word answer which answers your question. Because the answer has to fit me. We have to find, Arjuna found his answers in the message of Krishna, in his own way. The same way, each of us will have to find answers to our own life situations based on what Krishna is saying. Okay, so that is the reason I am hesitating to give you a very single word answer. The problem with single word answers in spirituality or religion is we get stuck to that. What is important is to go deeper into it, and somewhere the word will vanish from the scene and the mere intent will be left with us. Okay, we can take this offline. Feel free to discuss it with me. Take the contact details from Tipping Thoughts, and I'll be happy to discuss it. Now, the second part, how to face challenges of devotion, isn't it? Or whatever. Did I get your question right, Murli?
I'm asking him to unmute again. There was some background noise.
Okay.
Go ahead, Murli.
Yes, Guruji. Yes. Exactly, correct.
So, the point is, be it Karma Yoga, Bhakti, or any other field, even if you take the endeavor of your daily office work, what is important at work is we stay focused on the task at hand. Now, when it comes to spiritual life or religious life, what is the object of spirituality? We want to reach a state, we want to be ever happy, or we want to be free from misery. We have problems in life, but we want to be free from suffering. We don't want to suffer the problems. We want to be ready to face the problem. So we want to attain the goal of having a life where we are ever happy, ever content, ever at peace. Now, when we keep the focus of our pursuit very clearly in front of us all the time, we will be able to face all the hurdles that come. Okay? So this is a very general answer, but this is also the key to the spiritual path. When we focus on or keep the ultimate aim of this path, many hurdles. This is true for not just spirituality, but any endeavor in life. Okay? I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. We'll take the next question from Avni. Avni, go ahead.
Pranam Guruji. In my understanding, one of the key messages of the Gita is that karma karo and don't wait for the result. But as a human who's so actively involved in day-to-day living, how do I disassociate between the two? For example, I have started a new project or something in my day-to-day life, a business. And initially, yes, of course, I can keep doing my karma or my job and I will not wait for an outcome. But at some day, the thought of outcome, even to be able to sustain myself, I would expect some outcome, hope for some outcome. How do I resolve this in my mind? Should one wait for an outcome or not wait? And when does the outcome come? Or does it come in this birth, doesn't come? Could you please help me understand this part?
Okay, let me try briefly though. Okay, see, as human beings, we are discussing only the human being here, any action we undertake is with a purpose. Okay, there is no denial that whatever we do has a purpose to it. Okay, which means, suppose I'm speaking to communicate some ideas to you. Okay, and when I begin to speak, I should have the thought that whatever I want to convey, I'm able to get across to you. That is the purpose of what I'm trying to say. Otherwise, this 1 hour of talking is senseless. Obviously, any act we undertake, there is bound to be an outcome. So if I sow a sapling or sow a seed, it is bound to become a tree and it is bound to give you leaves, fruits, etc. Okay, there is no denial there. That's the first point. The message of Bhagavad Gita is, or the entire spirituality is, what do? We just don't plant the sapling or sow the seed. We start thinking about the tree growing bigger, bigger and bigger, and giving us a lot of fruits. The focus of the care or nurture or that or the manuring, the watering and other things we have to do to take care of the plant soon shifts to the background because we are overtaken by the thought of what we will get at the end of it. There is no denial that the end will come, the outcome will come. So if you work for a month, the paycheck will come to you. Okay, if I plant a sapling, the fruits will come on the plant, okay, on the tree or whatever it is. Any action will have its outcome. The only caution Bhagavad Gita gives, scriptures gives, do not get attached to the outcome. It doesn't mean shun the outcome. It doesn't make sense at all. So if I just by planting a tree or planting a plant, after let's say 4 months, suppose you pull the plant away and throw it, it doesn't make sense. The plant will yield flowers, it will yield fruits and so on. So yes, we are planting it to consume the fruits or the leaves or whatever it is. So it doesn't make sense to say I will reject the outcome. No, that's not the intent. The intent is do not get attached to it, which means if after you plant this and take care of it and nurture it, after 3-4 months, it yields, let's say, 4 kilograms of mango. Now, if somebody takes away those mangoes, okay, do not get upset about it. Do not become miserable over it. Do not suffer from it. Now, that is what the message is. When we become attached to the outcome, when things don't go in our favor, we become miserable. The intent of that message which you started off with is to tell us that we don't suffer from the outcome. We suffer because we cling to the outcome by way of what we expect from the outcome. Even simple actions we perform, suppose I came to your place and offered you something. Now somewhere in my mind I say, I'm offering her this, and I start thinking, if I give her this, I will get something in return. She will treat me well, I will get some benefits and so on and so forth. If that expectation is there, that is not, that's something that Krishna says, do not go there. Okay? The idea is not to cling to the outcome. Don't get attached to the outcome. The outcome is natural. When you perform an action, outcome will be there. There is no denial there. Okay? Is it good for a start?
Yes, thank you. We'll take the next question from Harish. I'm just unmuting him 1 second. Sorry. Harish, go ahead. I've asked you to unmute again.
Swamiji, in the Gita we talk about nature, human nature.
Yes.
Sat, Raj, Tamas. In Western psychology, there's a school of thought which says that the basic nature of a man does not change over life.
Mm-hmm.
Is it like the DNA, or can it be changed with some effort, some action, some thought? If I realize that I am more Rajsik or Tamsik, can I become more Satvik?
Oh yes, oh yes. That is the whole intent of the framework of the three gunas. The whole idea is to say that we are all governed by our nature, which are nature born. So we may have some things from the past which make us more predominantly this or that. Okay. Uh, it could be our upbringing, it could be the environment in which we live, it could be the people we live with, and so on and so forth. But at any point in time, of the three, there will be some proportions of each of these three. Now look at even our daily life. Now, very often when we get up in the morning, let's say, you get up and freshen up. At one point in time, we are absolutely fresh to grasp anything. And that time, the sattvic qualities in us, the sattvic nature of ours is more prevalent. Okay, it's more active. Now, somewhere over time in the day, we become more active. So we become predominantly more rajasic there. Okay? And there are often days when by the time we end the day, we lack our energy, we lack inertia. I mean, there is more inertia. We want to just be, we take it easy or idle and so on. That's nothing but tamasic. Now, definitely we can change from one to another. So let us say we feel more tamasic by way of feeling idleness or wanting to sleep it off and so on. It's very easy to take up some intense activity or rajasic activity and shift that focus from being tamasic to rajasic. Okay? And then give more attention to some activities which tend to take us away from only rajas. So let's say you start by listening to some music. Music is an activity, but it also soothes you down. It also calms your mind. So there are various ways by which we can shift our predominance towards one guna and take it to another. And that's the very purpose of discussing the framework of the three gunas. And that's why if you go into the 14th chapter, it is discussed in elaborate detail, and also in the 18th, where in every aspect of what we do, how these things play a critical role.
We'll take the next question from Seema. Seema, go ahead.
Pranam Guruji. Guruji, I just wanted to ask, like we are told many times by the people that we are responsible for our existence. So is it true that only we are responsible for our own existence?
Say we are responsible. Could you elaborate, please?
Sometimes when they're not good times, so we are told that we are responsible for our existence. In that time, like it's quite confused. So I just wanted.
Okay. Let me try to answer that. See, one of the critical things in spirituality is it gives a lot of importance to self-effort. Okay, so it says that anything in life we can strive to achieve. And that if that were not true, then human being will not take up any endeavor, be it religion, spirituality, or pursuit of wealth or anything like that. So we are sure that we can strive to change anything in our life. At the same time, there are nature's laws which govern things in society, in the universe. So, for example, suppose I live in a community where there is a particular resource. Let's say there is a tree. Now, the tree gives enough fruits for everybody in the society, in the community. Now, if one particular family wants to take all the fruits, thinking that there are guests coming and I will take more of it, is it possible? Though physically it is possible, but even in the equity or the distribution of that in the society, it doesn't work out well. So while I might have preferences towards doing something and gaining everything for myself, it doesn't help nature maintain its balance, maintain its equity there. So that way, nature will have some restrictions on whatever we do. Apart from that, yes, we have full freedom to exercise our effort and endeavor and thought process to strive in every direction. But definitely it will be governed by nature's laws whether that will happen or not. See, what is in your control is what is there within your mind. But you cannot control the external world. You can't dictate terms with another person. You can't say, you be happy, or you do this, or I want this from you. We may not be able to take complete control over another being. But what spirituality focuses all the attention on is one's own endeavor to make one's life peaceful. The focus is on one's own mind and intelligence. So, in that domain, we have full control. Am I getting closer to an answer for you?
Yes, thank you so much, Guruji.
Next question we will take from Anupma. Anupma, I'm asking you to unmute.
Hi, hi Sukriti, hi Prasanna. So my question was that, I was reading Bhakti Yoga and it talks about control of senses. So does not getting attached to the fruit of action equate to control of senses?
Can you please repeat that?
Does not getting attached to the fruit of action equate to control of senses?
No, not exactly, but our ability to control our senses may have an influence on our ability to stay unattached to things. Okay, so suppose we are able to cultivate the whole aspect of withdrawing our senses at will, then we will be in a greater position to resist any temptations, so to say, of attachment to a certain thing. Okay? So certainly it can help, but the two are necessarily not necessarily equal. For example, if you think of in the context of relationships which go outside the purview of typical sense organs or sensory control, for example, my attachment to a child, my attachment to a friend or a spouse or anybody like that. Now there, the sense organs may not have full role to play, may not be always, okay? So in those situations, it's not possible to say that the two will be equivalent, okay? So it goes beyond just sensory control, our ability to develop vairagya or non-attachment towards things. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, we'll take the last question from Nirmala. Nirmala, please go ahead. I'm asking you to unmute or I can read out your question. Nirmala? All right, I will ask her question. We cannot control our mind anytime. Sometimes we have to bear with very intolerating situations. For this, what is the best way to control our thoughts?
We are not able to control our mind. I didn't hear the rest of it.
We're not able to control our mind anytime. Sometimes we have to bear with very intolerating situations. For this, what is the best way to control our thoughts?
See, like any area of human endeavor, okay, here too, practice plays a critical part. In Bhagavad Gita too, Krishna talks about abhyasa. In Hindi also we have the word abhyas, practice. So here too, abhyas plays a very critical role. Practice plays a critical role. So whenever we discuss the subject of spirituality, do not think of it as instant solutions of some kind. Very often we have a problem and we want a quick fix to that problem. Okay? It doesn't happen like that. Even in the case of, let's say, staying fit, many of you might be engaged in some kind of regime or the other to stay fit. Now, the idea of fitness is not a one-time activity. So suppose you decide today that I will stay fit. It doesn't mean that I will do a 20-minute activity of walking few times a week and I'll be fit. No. Many of us are engaged in 24/7 for life. as far as fitness is concerned. We have to be constantly conscious of what we are eating, where we are sitting, how we are sitting, posture, and so many other things. So, even in the case of fitness, which is relating to the body alone, there is so much of mind involvement there and so much of persistent effort to overcome all obstacles, temptations, and so on to stay on the path to stay fit. Here too, when it comes to the mind, the same kind of effort is called for. So I'm sure you'll be able to do it, provided you give some time to it. In this endeavor also, we need to devote some time to the well-being of our mind. We do give time nowadays. There is more awareness about bodily well-being. Okay, we do give time to exercises, walking, dieting, and so many other things. The question we need to ask ourselves is, how much time do we devote to the wellness of our mind? Okay, so with that, I'll stop. I think.
Yeah. So I think we've had a very, very enriching session. Any last words from you before we sign off for today?
Yeah, I think we are closing in on Deepavali, and this very session also was thought of.
Contradiction, like we're doing Gita on Deepavali, but yes, it gives us the rules of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And Deepavali is a festival of lights. We call it a festival of lights. And light in our culture represents knowledge, and light represents truth. So let this. I wish uh, all of all of you there and your families a very happy Deepavali. And I wish that this marks the beginning of the pursuit of knowledge. That is, translating this festival of lights into a pursuit of knowledge, which lights represents. Okay, so I hope this session has been a curtain raiser to explore this subject a little more in detail. And I wish you all a very happy Deepavali, which is around the corner. And also, in the time of this pandemic, I wish you all and your families good health, peace, and sustained prosperity. Thank you so much for that.
Well, thank you, and thank you for being with us. Really, again, always very, very enlightening. With that, we wish you all a very good night and a very, very happy Diwali and a very safe Diwali.
Thank you. Thank you all.